Well, hey everybody, welcome to episode 205 of the Extra Mile podcast for bar exam takers. This is your host, Jackson Mummy. Glad to have you with us. We are now counting down, getting very close to the July 2018 bar exam. By the time this episode releases, we'll be within the 3-week window until the exam. So obviously a pretty significant point in time for those of you taking that test. We're glad to have you with us. We have a short episode planned in your honor today. We're not going to take up a lot of time, but I've got some important thoughts to share with you, so I hope you'll stick around. For those of you that are taking the exam in 2019, we're glad to have you with us as well. The message today is about information withdrawals. I think it will be very helpful to you as you get underway with your studies, and so I invite you to stay as well, but again, a little bit shorter episode. If this is your first time with us on the podcast, we're really glad to have you here, glad you found us. You can get your podcast from us in a couple of different ways. If you prefer the audio version, you can go to Apple iTunes or iHeartRadio or Spotify or just about any place that podcasts are syndicated, and you can get the audio version there. If you prefer the video version, and I would encourage you to use the video version today because I am using a slide presentation, you can do that by going to celebrationbarreview.com/ and then enter the episode number. So today's episode is 205, so it's celebrationbarreview.com/205, and you'll see all of the video part of the podcast there as well. Now, if you'd like to go back and check out some of our previous episodes, they are all available on our website at celebrationbarreview.com. You will find a tab at the top of the page called Podcast. Just click there, and all of our archives going back to the very first episodes are there, along with show notes. So I encourage you to check that out. In fact, there are a couple of previous episodes that I think are really great for those of you taking the exam in 3 weeks, and I want to point those out to you right now. Back a couple of years ago, I did in episode 100 an episode called "The Map is Not the Territory." One of my favorites. It was really based on a phrase that a good friend of mine, Bill Harris, who just recently passed away. He was the founder and creator of the Holosync audio meditation system. He used to say that all the time, and I kind of scratched my head and going, the map is not the territory. What does that mean? So I kind of worked it out and thought about it in terms of the bar exam, and that's episode 100, and we'll link to that today. Really a good episode, a good message, I think, for those of you who are just a few weeks away from your exam. The other episode that I want to link to today is episode 153. Turns out it's probably one of the top 10 episodes we've ever done in terms of popularity. It was a message about Wonder Woman, the movie. Now, you might have remembered or seen Wonder Woman when it came out a year or so ago, and it was incredibly powerful. Great movie, a lot of fun, but really a good message. And there was a scene in that movie that I thought was so perfectly appropriate for bar takers. And so I analogized from a very specific scene in that movie of Wonder Woman into what it's like in these last few weeks before the bar exam. If you have not seen that episode, I really encourage you to do that. It is literally one of my favorite videos and messages, and I hope you'll like it as well. So that's episode 153. So a couple of things for you to check out there if you're really just sort of looking for what happens 3 weeks before the exam. Now, for everyone else who's not taking the exam in July 2018, this is the time for you to start getting underway with your studies in 2019. And if you've been thinking about how to do that, I want to invite you to a free live webinar this Thursday. It's July 5th, so day after the holiday. We'll be live at 7 p.m. Eastern, that's 4 p.m. Pacific time, for our webinar entitled How to Make the Next Bar Exam Your Last Bar Exam. This is a look at the powerful, proven way to pass. During our time together, I will walk you through the 4 steps that successful bar students follow. I'll be sharing case studies of students in the last few years who've had great success in spite of tremendous difficulties and, in fact, in most cases, unsuccessful attempts at the bar previously. The information is the kind of information that you can take and use right away. It'll explain a very different way to study for the bar and a way that we know, based on now over 2 decades of experience, really works. There's no charge to attend, but you do need to register, and you can do that in one of several ways. You can go to our website at celebrationbarreview.com/webinar, so /webinar, and register there. If you're watching today's podcast on video, just scroll down this page. You'll see a link there to enroll. And if you are listening to the podcast, you can check the show notes, and there's a link there as well. Now, when you go to register for this free webinar, you will also see another option, which is an on-demand version of the webinar. if Thursday night, 7 p.m. Eastern doesn't work out in your schedule, or you just can't wait that long, you can schedule to watch the same content on your schedule right away if you wish with the on-demand version. Everything is the same, except that obviously I'm not there live to answer your questions. However, there is a email chat box right in the webinar. You can type your questions in and they'll be directed to me personally, and I will respond promptly. So we encourage you one way or the other to attend this webinar. It's life-changing. We've had thousands of people go through it, and I really encourage you, if you haven't gone through it, if you haven't heard about it, make sure that you check it out and put it on your schedule. And you might be thinking to yourself, well, it's awfully early to be thinking about that. Probably not. And if you're listening or watching this podcast, you're already thinking about the bar exam. So I think it's the right time for you for sure. So I hope you'll join us on Thursday at 7 p.m. for that special webinar, How to Make the Next Bar Exam Your Last Bar Exam. One final note that I want to just share with you before we jump into today's message. You may have heard us talking, in fact, in last week's episode, we recorded an interview that we did at something we call boot camp. And I've had some questions over the last week from people saying, what is this boot camp and how can I participate? Well, boot camp is a live 2-day event, although it's going to go to 2.5 days this year, that we do here in Celebration, Florida, right outside Disney World, right outside of Orlando. Now, this is a special event where we bring together students in a live setting, in a small group setting, to work through how to study for essays and performance tests and the MBE using a special tool called photo reading. This is a tool that we've talked about a lot in this podcast. I encourage you to check it out. It can make a radical difference in your score, as it has for so many of our students over the past few years. We really have had great success with this boot camp. And this year we're adding an extra half day on Friday afternoon to talk about specifics of essay writing. Now, the boot camp begins on Friday, November 30th, and it will go through Saturday and Sunday, December 1st and 2nd. It will be held again here in Celebration, Florida. It's a great time to come to Florida right before the Christmas holidays. Here in Celebration, we have snow every night. So there you go. It's the Disney town. You would expect that. In any event, boot camp is limited to students registered for our course, and the enrollment in boot camp is limited to a small number of students so that we can provide you with personal training and teaching. If you are considering boot camp and you're already a registered Celebration Bar Review student, I encourage you to go and register now, jump in. There's special pricing if you attend both sessions, the essay writing workshop on Friday and the photo reading boot camp on Saturday and Sunday. You can also just come to one of the events or the other. Now, if you're not registered for our course, well, this is probably a good opportunity for you to consider joining our course so that you can participate in this boot camp. The boot camp is not limited to students just sitting for a specific exam date or any exam jurisdiction, but it is limited to our own registered students. So if you'd like to know more about that, again, go to celebrationbarreview.com/bootcamp. That's BOOTCAMP. More details and information there. You can register for our bar review course and get your boot camp registration as well. So we encourage you to check that out. It was a great experience. The students who've been through it love it. They swear by it. And if you didn't hear last week's episode with James Botkin, who is a licensed Florida attorney now, who went through boot camp, passed the bar, and then came back to share his experiences as well. So we really think it's a great opportunity. Love to have you with us on November 30th, December 1st and 2nd here in beautiful downtown Celebration, Florida. So there you go. All right. Well, I want to jump to today's message, and I want to give you just a brief introduction to what we're going to talk about. A while ago, after the results came out from February 2018 bar exams, we were studying them, as we often do, and I was talking with Paul Sheely, who's the founder and director of Learning Strategies. They're the people that created photo reading and the paraliminals. He's really an extraordinary man. He's a PhD who has been studying human potential and human brain activity and neurolinguistic programming for probably 35, 40 years now. I was talking with him and also with one of my co-teachers in the boot camp, Millicent St. Clair, who works with Learning Strategies, and we were trying to determine why we were seeing a particular pattern among some students. In general, our students raised their scores dramatically on the bar after they employed these tools, but not everyone did. And the ones that didn't have overall large increases, what we saw was an interesting pattern. In some subjects, their scores went up wildly to the 75th, 80th, 85th percentile on the MBE in a particular subject. But in another subject, their scores were very, very low. And there didn't seem to be any correlative reason for that. In other words, it wasn't like it was everybody doing poorly in a specific subject, and it was odd. It was just some people were up and some people were down. And some of the same people would have a very high score in 5 subjects and a low score in 2 subjects. And so we did a lot of interviews with those students. We researched, we looked into it a little bit further. And when I was talking with Paul and we were trying to figure out what might be causing that particular phenomenon, he described something called an information withdrawal challenge or crisis. And you'll hear me talk about it in a moment. I wasn't entirely sure what that meant, but I played along. And it's like, okay, fine. And I started to think about it and work on it a little bit further. And it began to crystallize in my mind as to something that I could explain to our students in a way that I thought would really help them and hopefully help you today understand how you deal with the exam, how you get information during the exam, how you answer a question is an emotional and intellectual component to it that we often forget about. And so I wanted to put it in the context of making a withdrawal from the bank, but we're going to call it an information withdrawal. So in this message coming up that I shared with my students last week, I shared a mind map that I had created of this information withdrawal syndrome, which is why I would suggest that you have, if you have the opportunity, go to celebrationbarreview.com/205 so you can watch the video of that particular discussion. I think it'll make sense to you if you're listening, but it's better if you can see the pictures. In any event, I wanted to share with my students the idea of what this information withdrawal syndrome is, how they can overcome it, and what to be looking for as they're studying and then on the exam. So I want to share it with all of you today. I hope you'll find it helpful and certainly food for thought, something to think about just in terms of the way that you approach questions, whether they're essays or multiple choice, makes no difference at all. So let's jump into the discussion I had with my students recently about information withdrawals. And what I wanted to do is to share a little bit of how I see this process going for people, because I think it becomes really a challenge. What we call this was making an information withdrawal. I had a conversation with Paul Sheely at Learning Strategies. And I was talking to him about after the February 2018 exams. And I said, you know, I had some students who went through the exam. They were photo readers. They were studying. They were doing a lot of work. But then they got to the exam and they did really well in some subjects and not well in other subjects. And it was really kind of random and hard to figure out what was what. And he said, well, they're just having an information withdrawal problem. And, you know, in the way that when you're talking to really brilliant people, sometimes you don't want to sound incredibly stupid at that moment. I was like, oh, of course. And then I was like, I don't know what he means. So I started thinking about it and I talked to Millicent about it and I did some other work and I was like, okay. And I interviewed some students who had had that experience on the exam. And what I began to see was that there was a pattern to what was going on. Now, I put the image of a superhero up because those of you that have been in our boot camps know that I talk about setting a pose, striking a pose to feel like you're in charge, that you know what you're doing. That part of the process of the exam is being confident that you know what you know. And so I wanted to just briefly share with you this idea of how I think you should make the withdrawal of information. And to do that, I wanted to sort of walk you through what happens when you make a banking withdrawal, which is where I got to the whole discussion earlier about Venmo and the Cash App and so on. But I realized that there were a variety of different kinds of transactions that people make in their lives, and I wanted to talk through those. The first kind of transaction in a banking sense is what we call a normal transaction. You go to the ATM machine or you go to the bank if you're an old person and you write out a check. And you do that because you know you have money in your account. Now, that normal transaction for finance is one in which you're relatively calm. I mean, it's no big deal. It's just something you do. It's routine, and there's an expected outcome. I'll put my ATM card in the machine. I'll type in my PIN number, and I'll get cash back, or I'll write a check, and the cashier will give me cash back. And that is a normal, regular transaction. Now, our goal on the bar exam is that you would have normal, regular transactions, right? You go to the exam, you're calm, it's a routine experience, and there's an expected outcome. I'll be asked a question, I know the answer. Makes sense, doesn't it? It's just doing regular things in a regular way. This is when people are at their best. So how do they get to these normal transactions? Well, they do them because they know there's money in their information account. I've studied the subject. I've done mind maps. I've listened to lectures. I've done practice questions. I've read the outlines. I've talked about it and thought about it. I've practiced writing essays, whatever it might be. And as a result, it's routine, you're calm, and you get an expected outcome. That's the normal transaction. And I think we could all picture that and say, okay, that makes sense for me. All right. Now, if that's the case, what can happen? What else could happen? Well, you could go to the bank. I'm not saying this ever happened to me. However, you could go to the bank and you know that you don't have quite enough money in your account. In other words, you're going to write a check or put money in that ATM, and it may or may not be able to give you the money back, right? Anybody else ever had that experience? Yeah, maybe. You put your card into the ATM and you think, ooh, is it going to chew my card up and take it? Well, what happens then emotionally is that you are anxious. I don't know what's going to happen. I mean, it's an uncertain outcome for me. I don't know what's going to happen, and it takes time. The teller has to go check your account, or the ATM machine is clicking and whirring away. You've all had that feeling. Don't lie to me. You've had that moment when you're like, I don't know. Now, what does that look like on the bar exam? Well, you get to a question, and suddenly you go, I don't know if I know this. And you get anxious, and you start to tense up. Now you want to take a little more time to make sure you get it just right because you're not sure, because there's an uncertain outcome. You can feel that, can't you? You've got that question in front of you or that essay in front of you, and you start tightening up. You start clenching your teeth. Your breathing would actually change if you were aware of it. You notice that you're taking a lot more time than you would on a question where you knew the answer, and you're not certain what the outcome would be. It's a bad feeling. It's not a complete full-blown disaster. You may be able to save it. I may find out, hey, I did have enough money. I get my cash out. It's all good. The teller smiles at me and hands me my money. But I don't know that until that moment, right? Everybody got that? All right. Now, a third outcome is that you go to a bank and you don't have an account there and you don't have any money at that bank. And you walk in and you say, I got nothing. How am I going to get money out of this bank? Well, I'm going to rob them. So I pull out my gun. And we now have a full-blown crisis, right? I mean, this is not a good thing. And in this moment of crisis, at least as I've watched all those TV shows, I'm in a hurry. I'm rushed. Hey, give me the money right now. It's a crisis. I want it right now. And what's the result? It's a bad outcome. Definitely a bad outcome. Maybe for the bank robber, maybe for the teller, maybe for the other bystanders. But bad stuff is going to happen. Now, here's where some of you are living on the bar exam. You are living in the bank robbery zone. You come to a question and you're freaked out about it. I don't know. I don't have this information at all. Now what happens in your brain? It's a crisis. You feel rushed. You know it's going to be a bad outcome and you start to panic, right? You can feel that. And some of you have had that experience. Maybe you've had it frequently. And in that moment of crisis and feeling rushed and looking at the bad outcome, all sorts of bad things start to happen. Now, think about what happens at the bank at that moment. You come in with your guns out and you say, give me all your money. The teller hits the emergency button. The plexiglass window drops. The die and the money blows up or explodes. The vault door closes. You're not getting your money without force. In an information setting, you're not getting your information without force. And your brain, your non-conscious brain, now just shuts down. It's a crisis mode. You're not asking your non-conscious for help at this point. You are literally trying to get it all from your conscious mind. The problem is there's nothing in your conscious mind. We didn't put anything there. You don't have an account at that bank. And so now you've got a really bad outcome, and it's going to get bad, and it's going to keep getting bad. And it's tough to recover from the bank robbery mode of information withdrawal. All right. So I shared all that with Millicent and Paul, and I thought, that's pretty good. And then the other night I had an epiphany. I realized that there was a fourth level of what happens that might actually be more accurate for many of you. So, ta-da, here we go, the part you haven't seen. The worst case scenario. Yeah, that's what I came up with. The worst case scenario. You rob the bank, same as before, but now it's your own bank where you have an account with $1 million balance. Oh my God, how stupid can you be? See, imagine walking into your own bank and you say, stick them up. I want to rob this bank. Give me all your money. And they say, oh, Mr. Mummy, you do know that you have an account with us and it's got $1 million balance. All you have to do is write a check. What? This is my bank? I have money here? Why am I holding out a gun? Why am I trying to rob myself from my own account? That would be stupid, wouldn't it? It would be crazy to do that. But here's exactly what's happening to many of you on the bar exam. You have all the information already. You have your own information bank account, and it's worth millions of dollars. But you're trying to rob the bank, and you already own it. It's already there. And because you've got your gun out and you've got your bandana on and you're in a total crisis mode, well, what's happening? You're getting no progress. Everything stops for you. You're unable to answer the question. You see, instead of a normal, regular transaction, if you'd just gone in and said, what's my bank balance? Oh, you have $1 million in your bank account, or whatever it might be. Oh, I guess I don't need to rob the bank then, do I? I can just make an information withdrawal. You see, I think what a lot of you are doing on the exam is you're forgetting to ask yourself, what do I really know? So part of the approach to the test, whether it's essays or the MBE or multiple choice, is asking yourself, what do I know about this? As I'm reading the question, what do I know about this? I know a lot. I really do. I've got an account that's worth millions of dollars of information. And all I have to do is to make a withdrawal from that account. I'm not going to bounce a check. I'm not going to have to rob the bank. I've got that information. Instead of going into crisis mode, go in assuming that you already have a balance and that you can do the work. And when you do that, you're going to get a much better response. Well, that's our episode for today. I hope that you found that presentation helpful. I hope that it gets you to thinking a little bit about what an information withdrawal looks like for you during the exam and how you can use that information so that you're really at your peak performance rather than in crisis mode on the test. Now, again, I just want to remind you, we've got our free webinar coming up this Thursday, July 5th at 7 p.m. Eastern. It's 4 o'clock Pacific time. How to make the next bar exam your last bar exam. You can register at celebrationbarreview.com/webinar or by scrolling down on the video page to the link on the page. There's also an on-demand version of that webinar, so you've got a couple of different choices there. Well, I hope everybody that's studying for the July 2018 exam has a great study week. This is an opportunity to really boost your work and continue to improve, and it could be a really productive week for everybody. I hope that you had a good holiday. Look forward to seeing you next Wednesday when we come back for the next episode. We'll be just a couple of weeks at that point to the exam, getting closer all the time. We've got some great information and great stuff ahead for the next few weeks, so we're excited to share that with you. Thanks for being with us again today in this episode, and we'll see you along the extra mile and on the pass list. Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye.